We got a great show for you today. We're going to start with the Syrian Electronic Army. Have you heard about this? All of the uprisings in Arab Spring, there's been a lot of back and forth, what role social media has played in these uprisings across the Arab world. It's certainly a tool that's being used by opposition activists in Syria, but they have actually got some competition from a group of pro-Assad hackers and online activists who call themselves the Syrian Electronic Army. Their preferred means of attack is to overload the social networking profiles and websites of government institutions and Western media organizations. And among their targets has been the American magazine, The Atlantic. Now, the BBC did this interview with The Atlantic's associate editor, Fishor.
We ran an interview about a week ago, an interview with a Syrian activist who had fled the country, and it was pretty standard stuff. He was talking about torture in the country, his work as an opposition activist. And then we discovered that we posted the article to our Facebook page, and there were first dozens and then hundreds of comments showing up, all using slight variations of the same language, saying, you don't understand what's happening in Syria, the opposition is terrorists, we love Bashar al-Assad, who's the president behind this regime that's torturing dissidents. And we traced it back, and we figured out what had happened is there was a Facebook page for something calling itself the Syrian Electronic Army that had issued, in Arabic, basically a call to arms to its thousands of followers, saying there's opposition activists had this article at theatlantic.com, and we need to go tell them about the truth of Syria. And there were so many comments from these pro-regime Syrian people that we just had to remove the link. They had completely shut down the conversation.
So it's not just a question of people trying to get a message across. They're actually, in a sense, interfering in the way you do your business.
Absolutely. It's a distributed denial of service attack, and it's an orchestrated campaign to close down discussion because it's a discussion that does not favor their agenda.
Do we know who these people are?
So the Syrian Electronic Army, as they call themselves, there's a couple things that we know about them. The first is that they do have some kind of ties to the regime. President Bashar al-Assad has mentioned them in a speech, encouragingly, and somebody managed to track down the domain name for their website. It was actually initially registered by an organization that Assad used to be in charge of before he became president. So there's some kind of a connection to the regime. And from their activities, it's pretty clear that they've got some pro-level hackers working for them. But what's interesting is that there's also hundreds or maybe even thousands of people who, as best we can tell, are not professional hackers, who are basically real people. We looked through a number of the Facebook comments, and they launched these kind of attacks on social media across the internet. Even Barack Obama's Facebook page got hit. And there's too much variation in the Facebook pages for them to be robots, for them to be fakes. And so it's interesting because, you think of young tech-savvy people who are on social media as people who would naturally be for the opposition, for democracy. And that's been generally the case in most of the Arab uprisings. But in Syria, it looks like there's some kind of significant contingent of young people who are on social media who are actually for the regime and are willing to mess around with other people's websites in defense of them.
Interesting indeed, because it gives President Assad something his, rulers in Egypt and Tunisia didn't have, and that is support online.
Absolutely. One of the things that opposition activists were really able to do in Egypt and Tunisia and in Libya is because the physical spaces were so shut down to them and it was so difficult for them to mobilize physically or even over the phone, is that they went online. And that's how they were able to get large enough numbers to rush into the streets, 10, 50,000 people at a time. And the Assad regime has been very sophisticated in their response, challenging people not just in the streets, in the physical spaces, but also online in a way that's been really disruptive to the opposition. They've even managed to launch phishing scams. On Twitter and on Facebook, they've managed to lure some opposition activists into giving over their Facebook and Twitter logins.
That is potentially, that sounds potentially much more sinister.
Absolutely.
Max Fishor there, editor of The Atlantic magazine, talking about the Syrian Electronic Army. Okay, chances are good we're probably going to have more on that coming up in a future episode. Now